At my brother's wedding, right in front of our entire family, his bride turned to me and said, "We don't want broken families in our family photos." Then she looked me straight in the eye and added, "You can sit this one out." I froze. Everyone else stayed quiet. My brother didn't say a word. My hand started to shake, but I nodded and stepped back without making a scene. My 10-year-old son, Milo, was holding my hand just a second before. He let go, walked straight up to the photographer, and handed him a small, folded piece of paper. The photographer opened it. Milo looked up and said, "Can you read this first?" I watched the bride shift her eyes to the floor. That moment changed everything. Weddings are supposed to bring people together. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as I zipped up my navy blue dress and helped my son, Milo, adjust the collar of his button-down shirt. He grinned up at me, missing one of his front teeth, looking more like a boy playing dress-up than a guest at a formal wedding. He was excited. He always loved big events, and he adored his Uncle Elias. I tried to match his energy, but underneath the lipstick and curled hair, I was nervous. I hadn't been to many family gatherings since my divorce 3 years ago. I wasn't sure where I fit anymore. People don't always know what to do with single mothers, especially in families like ours that pretend everything is fine even when it clearly isn't. Elias was my younger brother by 3 years. Growing up, he was the wild one, charming, always in trouble, but impossible not to love. After our dad passed away when we were kids, I stepped in and tried to be a second parent more than a sister. I helped with homework, packed his lunches, stayed home when he was sick so Mom wouldn't have to call out of work. I grew up fast. Elias got to stay a kid a little longer, and I never held that against him. I wanted him to have that freedom. When my own marriage started to crumble, Elias was the one who came over with takeout and terrible movies. He didn't say much, but he showed up. When my ex-husband walked out on us for good, Elias carried my couch down the apartment stairs himself so Milo and I could move into a smaller place. That's the kind of brother he was, not perfect but solid when it mattered. So when he told me he was getting married to a woman named Sienna, I was genuinely happy for him. I hadn't spent much time with her, but from what I knew, she was organized, stylish, and very into appearances. She never said anything unkind to me directly, but there was a certain tightness in her smile every time we crossed paths. I chalked it up to nerves, or maybe just a difference in personality. I didn't want to be the kind of sister-in-law who caused drama. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I texted Elias to ask what I could do to help. He said just being there would mean everything. So I bought a new dress, one that wasn't too flashy but made me feel like myself again. I got Milo a haircut. I even volunteered to help Mom bake cookies for the welcome table. I wanted to show up the way families should. The ceremony was held at a vineyard 2 hours from our town. Rows of white chairs were set up under a canopy of string lights. Everything looked like a page out of a magazine. The weather was perfect. The music was elegant. People were laughing, sipping champagne, posing for photos with the rolling hills behind them. I stood off to the side most of the time, watching Milo run around with his cousins. I noticed early on that Sienna barely acknowledged me. I tried to brush it off, reminding myself it was her day, not mine. She was surrounded by her friends, her sorority sisters, and a flurry of distant relatives I couldn't keep straight. Elias looked handsome in his navy suit. When he saw me, he hugged me tight and said, "Thanks for coming, Cal." He always called me Cal, short for Calla, even though no one else did. It reminded me of when we were kids. I smiled and told him, wouldn't miss it. But I did notice he kept his eyes moving, like he didn't want to linger too long. I didn't take it personally at the time. I thought he was just caught up in the moment. As the ceremony ended and people started to gather for photos, I stayed near the edge of the crowd with Milo. I wasn't sure where I was supposed to stand, and honestly, I didn't want to get in the way. I was used to staying invisible when the spotlight wasn't mine. Still, a part of me hoped someone might wave me in. Maybe Elias or even our mom, but no one did. I took a deep breath, smiled down at Milo, and fixed the wrinkle in his shirt. "You look like a movie star," I told him. He smiled, but then we both turned as we heard Sienna speak loudly and clearly. The photographer had called for family to gather, and Sienna responded with something I'll never forget. But that moment deserves its own space. The ceremony was beautiful. Sienna looked like a porcelain doll in her lace gown, standing beside Elias with her bouquet clutched like a shield. The vows were short and polished, delivered with practiced poise. People clapped. Some wiped tears. Elias glanced toward the crowd once, and for half a second, our eyes met. He smiled. I smiled back. That moment felt real. After the ceremony, the coordinator began gathering everyone for formal photos. There was a list: bridesmaids, groomsmen, parents. Then came the extended family. Sienna's side moved with confidence, knowing exactly where to go. Her mother, a thin woman in a cream pantsuit and pearls, directed people like it was a corporate shoot. Someone called out, "Let's get the whole family!" I turned to Milo, smoothing his hair. "That's our cue." We started walking toward the arch where the photographer was setting up. I felt a flutter in my chest. Not excitement, but something like cautious hope. This was a moment I had prepared for quietly. I would stand in the back, hold Milo's hand, smile for the camera, and take my place without asking for one. As we approached, I saw Sienna stiffen. She looked at me, then at Milo, then at her mother. Something unspoken passed between them. Then she stepped forward, right in front of the group, and raised her hand to pause the photographer. She turned to me, her voice firm and clear. "Actually, we don't want broken families in our family photos." For a second, I didn't understand what she meant. I thought maybe she was referring to someone else. But her eyes didn't move. She added, "You can sit this one out." The breeze stilled. I heard the click of the photographer's lens as he lowered his camera. A quiet ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. Elias didn't say a word. He looked down at his shoes. I felt my heart kick inside my chest. My ears buzzed, but I forced my face to stay still. Milo tugged on my hand, his little fingers tight around mine. I squeezed his hand and nodded, gently pulling him back with me. "It's okay," I whispered to him, keeping my voice light. "Go stand with Grandma." He looked up at me, confused. "But we're family." My throat burned. I bent down to his level and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "It's just a picture, honey. It doesn't change who we are." He didn't move right away. His body stayed stiff. I gave him a tiny push toward the group and stepped back. I moved to the very edge of the patio where the gravel path met the grass, far enough to be out of the frame but close enough to see everything. The group adjusted. Sienna's mother guided people into position. The photographer tried to bring the mood back. "Okay, everyone," big smiles. I watched Milo stand off to the side. He didn't smile. His hands were in his pockets, and he kept looking back at me. My mother, standing 2 rows in, didn't turn around. She didn't look at me at all. A woman beside me, someone I didn't know, leaned slightly and whispered, "That was uncomfortable." I gave her a tight smile and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The bride had spoken, and no one had corrected her. I stood there for what felt like forever, holding my hands together to keep them from shaking. My chest felt heavy, but I stayed still. I didn't cry. Not yet. Then, just before the photographer raised the camera again, I saw Milo reach into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He stepped forward and tapped the photographer's arm. The man looked down at him, surprised. Milo handed him the note and said, "Can you read this first?" Every head turned. Even Sienna looked over, her mouth pressed in a straight line. The photographer unfolded the paper slowly. No one moved. No one said a word. Something was about to happen, and none of them saw it coming. But I did, because I know my son. The photographer held the folded note like it might burn his fingers. His eyes moved across the page, slowly at first, then more deliberately. The tension around the group was thick, like the whole patio had stopped breathing. I watched from the edge, holding myself perfectly still, unsure what would happen next. I didn't know what Milo had written, but I saw the look on his face, the way his chin was set, the way his hands stayed at his sides. He wasn't scared. The photographer looked down at Milo again and asked, "You sure you want me to read this out loud?" Milo nodded. I stepped forward slightly, instinctively. My body wanted to pull him back to safety, to protect him from whatever might come next, but something in his stance stopped me. This wasn't a tantrum or a protest. This was something else. This was intentional. The photographer cleared his throat and raised the note. He read, "My name is Milo. I'm 10 years old. I was told my mom can't be in the family photo because we are a broken family. but we are not broken." A few people shifted. I saw Elias glance toward the sound of the words, his face pale. Sienna's expression didn't change, but her posture tightened. The photographer continued, "My mom is the one who makes my lunch every day. She came to my school concert when no one else could. She sits with me when I'm scared of the dark and helps me with math even when she's tired. She is not broken. She's the reason I smile in every photo." My throat clenched. I had no idea Milo had written those words, no idea he had been carrying them with him. The day I taught him how to tie his shoes, he cried when I left him at the bus stop. Now he was standing in front of 30 strangers, standing taller than I had ever seen him. The photographer's voice shook slightly as he finished. "If my mom isn't in the picture, I'm not either." He lowered the note. No one said anything. A bridesmaid blinked hard and looked away. One of Sienna's uncles cleared his throat like he was trying to swallow a stone. My mother looked down, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Sienna turned away, her jaw clenched, lips pressed into a thin, irritated line. She didn't speak. She didn't move toward Milo. She just crossed her arms and stared off to the side. Elias stepped forward. He walked through the group until he reached Milo, then crouched beside him. "Did you write that?" he asked softly. Milo nodded again. Elias looked toward me. For the first time all day, he really looked at me. His face was a mix of guilt, love, and something I hadn't seen from him since we were kids: shame. He stood, held out his hand, and said, "Cal, come take your place." My legs felt heavy. My instinct was to protect Milo, to scoop him up and walk away, to shield him from any more stares. But then I saw his hand still open, reaching for mine, and I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about my son knowing that the people who love you stand up for you even when they're scared. I walked to them. My heels crunched softly on the gravel, but it felt like thunder in the silence. I took Elias's hand, then Milo's. Together, we stepped into the frame. No one stopped us. No one dared. The photographer raised his camera again. "Let's try again," he said. Real smiles this time. Milo leaned into me. Elias kept his hand on his nephew's shoulder. I didn't look at Sienna. I didn't need to. The note had already spoken for me. In that moment, I didn't feel ashamed. I didn't feel broken. I felt seen. And not because someone let me into a photo, but because my son refused to let me be erased. As we stood there together, the three of us, Elias, Milo, and me, the tension in the crowd started to shift. No one said anything outright, but the silence was no longer stiff with judgment. It was filled with something heavier, something real. People began adjusting their posture. Some looked down, others looked directly at me for the first time that day. But no one stopped the photo from happening. The photographer gave a small nod and took the shot. The shutter clicked. Once, twice, a third time. Milo gave a half smile that looked more grown up than 10-year-olds should know how to wear. Elias looked like he was still trying to figure out what just happened. And I stood in the center, not because I demanded it, not because someone finally invited me, but because my son had reminded everyone what family actually looks like. Sienna stepped back from the group. She didn't walk away, but her body was turned just slightly, her arms still crossed, her mouth tight. She said nothing to the photographer. She didn't acknowledge Milo or me. Instead, she turned toward her bridesmaids, who whispered something that made her shake her head. She kept her distance for the rest of the photos. She was present but withdrawn, like she had lost control of something she had counted on staying polished. When the formal photos ended, people started to mingle again. Glasses clinked. Music picked up. The weight of the moment began to scatter in pieces across the patio, carried by conversation and movement. But not everyone moved on so quickly. A few of Elias's friends came up to me, patting Milo on the back and telling him they had never seen anything like that. One woman in a floral dress said quietly, "That was brave, for both of you." I smiled and thanked her. Inside, I was still steadying my breath. My mother approached slowly. Her heels clicked against the stone path. She stopped beside me and looked at Milo, not at me. "You're raising a good one," she said. Then after a long pause, she added, "I should have said something earlier." I froze. I didn't offer her comfort. I just nodded and said, "Thank you." That was all either of us could manage. Her silence had been loud, but I wasn't there to tally failures. I was there for my son. Later, as the reception began and people filed into the barn for dinner, I walked with Milo toward the buffet. Elias caught up to us near the entrance. He reached for my arm, stopping me gently. "Can we talk?" he asked. I looked at Milo. He gave me a quick nod and headed inside. Elias shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know she was going to say that. I swear, I would never have let that happen." "But you didn't stop it," I said. He dropped his gaze. "I know, I messed up." There was a pause, not empty, but full of what had been left unsaid for too long. "I didn't want to ruin the moment," he said. "But Milo, he did what I should have done." "He reminded you what family is," I said. Elias nodded. "He's the bravest person here." I could see the guilt on his face, and I didn't want to pour more shame into a wound he now understood. But I needed him to carry that truth with him. "I showed up, Elias. That's what I always do, even when it's hard, even when I'm not wanted." "You were wanted," he said quickly. "I was just too scared to show it." It wasn't enough, but it was honest. He pulled me into a hug. It wasn't showy. It was quiet and real, the kind of hug that comes from years of history, not just a day in a rented suit. He held on longer than he usually would. "Thank you for being there," he said. "I always will be, whether I'm in the picture or not." Then we pulled apart, and I walked back inside, where Milo was waiting, holding 2 plates of dinner, one for me, one for him. He handed me mine and said, "That was weird, huh?" I smiled. "Weird and perfect in its own way." He nodded. "Still glad we came." "So am I said. And for the first time that day, I truly meant it. The drive home that night was quiet. Milo sat in the back seat barefoot, his dress shoes tucked under his arm like a secret. He had danced until the very end, twirling around with cousins, sneaking extra cupcakes, and laughing like nothing had happened. But I knew it stayed with him. Kids understand more than they say. As I watched him through the rearview mirror, I thought about everything that had happened in just a few hours. I had come to my brother's wedding prepared to disappear. I had come ready to stand in the background to let the new family form without needing to be seen. I didn't expect to be welcome. I just didn't think I'd be openly rejected. But I hadn't come alone. I came with my son. And while I stayed silent, he chose to speak. When we pulled into our driveway, Milo unbuckled his seatbelt and leaned forward between the front seats. "Did I make things worse?" he asked. That question cut straight through me. The fact that he had to wonder broke my heart. "No," I said. "You made things clear." He looked unsure. Uncle Elias looked kind of mad. "He wasn't mad at you," I said. "He was mad at himself." We went inside, and I tucked him into bed without much fanfare. He asked for an extra story, so I read one. Then he asked if I could stay with him until he fell asleep, and I did. When I finally stood up to leave his room, he reached out and said, "I'm glad we're not broken." I turned back to him and said, "We never were." I went to bed that night feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Not anger, not sadness, not shame. I felt still. Not because everything had been resolved, but because I had seen who stood with me when it counted, and that mattered more than being accepted by people who only valued appearances. In the days that followed, a few people from the wedding reached out. One of Sienna's bridesmaids sent a short message on social media. "Your son is incredible." That moment really opened my eyes. Elias called 3 times before I finally picked up. We talked for almost an hour. He apologized again without defensiveness this time. He told me he had shown the note to Sienna afterward and that she didn't have much to say. He admitted that was hard to hear, but necessary. He also told me something I hadn't expected. He said, "I didn't realize how many people were just pretending to belong until I saw the way Milo stood up for you." That was the most honest moment of the whole day. I told him I appreciated that. I didn't ask about Sienna or the photos. I didn't need to. The truth had already been captured, in front of everyone, with nothing more than a folded piece of paper and a child's voice. Weeks passed. The wedding photos were posted online, perfectly edited, carefully cropped. But in one, just one, I saw myself standing between my brother and my son. I wasn't in many others, and that was fine. I didn't need a gallery to prove I had been there. That one photo said everything. When Milo saw it, he smiled. "I look taller in pictures," he said. I laughed. "You stood tall, that's why." What I learned that day wasn't something new. It was something I had always known but never said out loud. Family isn't the people who look perfect beside you. Family is the people who choose you, the ones who speak when others go quiet, who refuse to let you be erased just to keep the peace. We didn't leave that wedding with party favors or compliments. We left with something much more valuable. We left with the reminder that we are whole, just as we are. And sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one that tells the truth no one else is brave enough to say. I didn't need their approval. I had my son. And that was enough. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone who stood by you when it mattered, share it. Send it to someone who might need to hear that they're not broken just because someone else couldn't see their worth. Leave a comment below. Tell me about the moment you realized your voice mattered or when someone stood up for you in a way you never expected. I read every single one. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. I've got more stories that dive deep into what it means to be human, to love, to lose, and to heal. And if you like this video, hit that like button. It really helps more people find stories that need to be heard. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. "You'll never be like Nathan," my dad said, his voice flat, cold, as if the words were just truth. I remember the exact moment. We were in the kitchen. The fluorescent light above us flickered like it was struggling to stay alive, kind of like me, standing there, gripping the edge of the counter just to keep from snapping. I just told him I was launching a business, nothing big, just something I'd been working on quietly for months, something I was proud of. But instead of encouragement, he didn't even blink. He just scoffed. Then came those words, "You'll never be like Nathan." I felt my stomach drop, like the floor had vanished beneath me. My hands went numb as I pressed them into the cold granite, trying not to show how much it hurt. Nathan. Always Nathan. My older brother, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Star athlete in high school, top of his class in college, the one who followed the family business path, like some flawless blueprint. And then there was me, Emma, the creative one, sensitive, quiet, too emotional, not practical enough, never good enough. My dad's face didn't even twitch when he said it. No regret, no hesitation, just this firm, matter-of-fact tone like he was pointing out the weather. I looked at my mom. She was sitting at the table sipping her tea. Her eyes didn't leave the cup. Her lips pressed tightly together, as if holding back words she'd never say. Her silence was worse than his insult. At least he said what he thought. She just let it happen. Why did his words hurt so much? Why did I still care what he thought? Was I not enough? Again? I swallowed hard and forced a smile, the kind you wear like armor. "Okay, thanks for the support, Dad," I said, my voice cracking at the edges. He didn't even notice. Nathan walked in just then, all confidence and cologne, tossing his car keys on the counter like he owned the place. My dad lit up like a Christmas tree. "There he is. Big meeting go well?" Nathan shrugged casually. "Yeah, closed the deal." Dad beamed. "That's my boy." I could feel it then, the burning behind my eyes, the lump in my throat. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the tile floor beneath my feet. Instead, I grabbed my bag and walked out without saying another word. The air outside was cold and sharp, biting at my cheeks as I stepped onto the porch. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there staring at nothing, hearing his words on a loop in my head. "You'll never be like Nathan." Just a disappointment. I wanted to scream, to run, to throw something. But instead, I reached for my phone. My fingers trembled as I opened the app I'd been building in secret, my little project, my little spark of rebellion. I stared at the dashboard. It wasn't much, a few hundred users, a tiny bit of traction, but it was mine. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not even sadness, just this quiet defiance, like a whisper that rose from the ashes of everything I'd buried inside me for years. What if I didn't need to be like Nathan? What if I didn't need their approval? What if I just proved them all wrong? I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I made myself a promise on that porch. One day, they'd see me not as a disappointment, but as something they never expected. And when that day came, I wouldn't just walk back into their lives. I'd walk in as their boss, and they'd never see it coming. People think the words that hurt the most are the loud ones, the yelling, the insults, the screaming matches. But growing up in the Carter household, the pain was quiet. It came in comparisons, in glances, in the way love was measured and distributed like it was some limited resource. And I always got the scraps. Our house sat on a hill just outside of town, picture perfect from the outside. White shutters, a tidy lawn, flowers that bloomed every spring. But inside, it felt more like a glass museum, pristine, controlled, fragile. There was no room for messiness, no room for softness, and definitely no room for someone like me. Nathan was 3 years older. From the time we were kids, it was clear. He was the one. Straight A's, varsity everything, handshake like a CEO before he was even shaving. Dad would light up just watching him walk into a room. "See how Nathan does it?" he'd say after every school event, every dinner, every time I tried to breathe. I remember one night, 8th grade. I had just won a small writing contest at school. I was buzzing with excitement, holding the certificate in both hands like it was gold. I walked into the living room, practically floating. "Dad, look what I won!" He barely glanced up from his laptop. "That's nice, honey." That was it. No smile, no follow-up, just a dismissive tone and a quick pivot. "Nathan, did Coach get back to you about that scholarship?" And just like that, my little moment evaporated. I stood there, still holding the certificate, my face burning as Nathan launched into a full recap of his day. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, trying to remind myself that maybe it didn't matter, that maybe writing didn't count in our world, but it did matter, to me. That moment wasn't the only one like it. My life became a loop of almosts. Almost good enough, almost worth noticing, almost part of the family, but never quite in the center of it. I got used to living in the background. I learned how to shrink myself, how to keep dreams small so they wouldn't be mocked. I became the master of staying quiet when my heart wanted to scream. And Mom, she never intervened, not once. I don't think she hated me. I think she just didn't know how to go against him. She stayed tucked into her own quiet world, polite smiles, folded laundry, and too many cups of tea. When Dad said something cruel, she'd flinch, but say nothing. Her silence screamed louder than anything he could have said. Still, I watched. I learned. While Nathan was being groomed to take over the family business, I was learning something else. How to survive being overlooked. How to observe, analyze, read between the lines. I knew every beat of their routines, every flaw in their operations, every weakness they couldn't see because they were too busy patting each other on the back. I didn't know it then. But every moment I spent in their shadow was preparing me. I didn't need their spotlight. I was building something better, something of my own. They never saw it, they never asked. They just assumed I'd drift off, marry someone who'd handle the money and maybe volunteer part-time. That's who I was to them. Sweet, soft, unambitious Emma. They didn't see the fire. Not yet, but one day, they would. Because I wasn't just a shadow anymore. I was a storm gathering on the edge of their perfect little world, and the moment I stepped back into their lives, everything they thought they knew about me, about themselves, was going to change forever. The last real conversation I had with my father was the one that broke me. It was about a year after I left home. I'd been scraping by, trying to find my footing, living in a tiny studio apartment with paper-thin walls and a heater that rattled like it was on its last breath. I was juggling part-time jobs, building my business idea during late nights when the city outside was finally quiet. It was exhausting, yes, but for once, it was mine. My life, my work, my mess. And I was proud of every failure because it meant I was trying. But pride can be fragile when it's still healing. And all it took to shatter mine was one phone call. I'd reached out, stupidly hoping for support, maybe even just a little encouragement. My small eco-packaging startup had just signed its first real client, a boutique skincare brand. Nothing huge, but it was a win. I was so excited I couldn't keep it in. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, legs bouncing with nervous energy as I dialed the number. Dad answered on the second ring. "Emma." "Hey, Dad, got a minute?" He sighed, an audible, impatient breath like I was already wasting his time. Make it quick. I swallowed hard and forced a smile even though he couldn't see it. I signed my first client today for the business, the eco-packaging thing I told you about. There was silence, a long, heavy pause. I thought the call had dropped. Then he laughed, actually laughed. That little project? You're still doing that? I felt my throat tighten. Yeah, it's growing, slowly, but... He cut me off. Emma, come on, you're chasing fairy tales. You want to play CEO while your brother's out there making real deals. You think someone's going to take you seriously? Every word landed like a punch to the chest, but he wasn't done. This is why I said you should have just worked with us. We had a position open in admin, but no, you always have to do your own thing. You'll never survive out there. My fingers clenched around the phone. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear his voice anymore. Why do you always assume I'll fail? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Another pause. Then, in the coldest tone I've ever heard from him, because you're not Nathan. And just like that, something in me snapped. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just ended the call and sat there in the dim light of my apartment, staring at the cracked screen of my phone, feeling everything all at once. Rage, shame, heartbreak, but most of all, this deep, rising defiance. He doesn't see me, he never will, but that doesn't mean I don't exist. That night, I made a decision. No more half-trying, no more waiting for validation that was never going to come. If they weren't going to believe in me, fine. I'd believe in myself loud enough for all of them. I quit one of my jobs, reinvested every dollar into the business, reached out to mentors, joined a women-led founder group, took night classes. I slept less, hustled harder, and I learned, really learned, how to build something real. All the while, I kept hearing his voice in my head. You'll never survive out there. He had no idea he'd just given me all the fuel I needed, and he definitely didn't know that I was coming for everything he thought I could never have. The world didn't suddenly open its arms to me after that phone call. There wasn't some magical overnight success, no dramatic montage with upbeat music and a cheering crowd. It was quiet, ugly, lonely, and I loved it. There was something freeing about hitting rock bottom emotionally. It meant there was nothing left to lose. I stopped caring about how I looked to my parents. I stopped waiting for anyone to say, I'm proud of you. I started asking myself, what if I just became the kind of person I was proud of? I changed everything. I moved into an even smaller place. My studio became a shoebox. Literally, I could touch the sink from my bed. The walls were so thin I could hear the neighbor's alarm clock buzz every morning. I worked 16-hour days, packed boxes myself, pitched clients over Wi-Fi that cut out every 10 minutes. I delivered orders by hand in the beginning, riding the subway with giant boxes, sweating through my clothes, pretending I was totally fine. But underneath all the exhaustion, something wild and electric was growing. Confidence. Real confidence. Not the kind you fake to get through a dinner with your father, the kind that comes from knowing what you're building. And I wasn't just building a business, I was building a future they couldn't touch. I renamed the company Wild Nest Goods. It started as a line of biodegradable packaging, but quickly expanded into full eco-supply solutions for small businesses. I listened to my clients. I learned their pain points. I made changes. I reinvested everything, and I started hiring. First freelancers, then contractors, then full-time staff. I built a team of women, of outsiders, of people like me, people who had been told they were too sensitive, too messy, too different to make it. We were scrappy, fierce, and we were growing. 2.5 years in, I was sitting in my tiny office, a converted back room in a co-working space, when I got a text from an old family friend, someone who worked quietly behind the scenes at Carter & Company, my family's empire. It said, "Are you watching what's happening with the company?" I wasn't. I hadn't thought about Carter & Company in months, but curiosity got the better of me. I started looking into it. Turns out, they weren't doing so well. In fact, they were bleeding. Declining clients, dated systems, poor online presence, no sustainable options in an industry that was moving full speed into green logistics. And the kicker? Their largest supplier had just pulled out, leaving them scrambling. I stared at the reports like I was watching the walls of my old prison crack open. I wasn't happy they were failing, but I wasn't sad either. It felt poetic. Still, I didn't rush in. I waited, watched, studied. I wanted to make sure this wasn't a fluke. In the meantime, Wild Nest exploded. We landed 3 major contracts in under 6 months. Our revenue tripled. My team doubled. We got press, awards, and then we caught the attention of a major investor. They wanted to partner, expand, acquire, and suddenly I had capital, real capital. Enough to do something I never thought I'd do. Buy Carter and Company not out of revenge, out of strategy, because their infrastructure was solid, their reach still wide. But their leadership? Outdated, arrogant, vulnerable. I ran the numbers, ran them again, brought it to my board, and together we made a decision. We'd acquire the company quietly. No press, no noise, just a transfer of power, and I'd be the one to deliver the contracts. In person. I could already picture it. My father's face, my mother's silence, Nathan's shock. But this wasn't about payback. It was about taking back the narrative. I was no longer Emma, the overlooked daughter. I was Emma Carter, the new owner of everything they said I could never build. I remember the way the doors felt in my hands. Solid, cold, heavier than I expected. The office looked exactly the same as it did the last time I'd been there years ago. Same glossy floors, same smell of fresh coffee and polished wood, same framed photo of Nathan and my father shaking hands after his first big deal, still hanging like a trophy in the front hallway. But this time, I didn't feel small walking through it. I felt steady, rooted. I wore a tailored navy blazer, clean lines, sharp shoulders, simple, intentional, no flashy jewelry, just presence, confidence. Every step echoed as I walked through the hallway toward the conference room. I knew they'd all be there, my father, my mother, and Nathan. I'd sent the meeting invitation myself, signed with my new title, Emma Carter, CEO, Wild Nest Holdings, parent company, Carter and Company. No one had responded to the email, but I knew they'd show, and they did. They were seated when I entered, the 3 of them in a row like some kind of tribunal. Nathan looked confused. My mother looked anxious. My father looked annoyed, arms crossed, jaw tight. Classic George Carter. I closed the door gently behind me and walked to the head of the table without saying a word. For a moment, no one breathed. Then my father spoke. "What's this about?" His tone was already defensive, like I was interrupting his day, like I didn't belong in that room. I met his eyes and sat down, calm. Centered. "I'm here to finalize the transition," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 crisp folders, contracts, printed, tabbed, highlighted. Nathan leaned forward. "Wait, transition?" I nodded. "As of this morning, Carter and Company is now owned by Wild Nest Holdings." Silence, then laughter. My father actually laughed, but it didn't last long. He looked at me, suddenly uncertain. "What are you talking about?" I pushed the contracts across the table toward him and my mother. "This is your new employment agreement. Both of you." My mother blinked, looking down without reaching for the folder. My father stayed frozen. Nathan, on the other hand, understood faster than I expected. "You bought us?" he said slowly. "You?" I turned to him. The business was undervalued. Too much debt, poor digital infrastructure, minimal sustainability practices. But the bones were good, and the brand still had name recognition. So yes, I bought it. I watched as realization settled across their faces like a storm cloud thickening in slow motion. My father's face turned red, but he said nothing. "You work for me now," I added, keeping my voice low, even, not gloating, just true. That was the moment. The moment I'd imagined 1,000 times, and yet it didn't feel like fireworks. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet. Satisfying in a way that ran deep, like a wound closing. My father finally spoke. "You think this means you won?" I looked at him for a long moment. "This isn't about winning, Dad. It's about building something you never thought I could. And now I'm offering you both the chance to stay, if you're willing to work under a new kind of leadership." He stared at me. I saw it then, just for a second. The flicker of guilt, the beginning of regret. He didn't take the contract. He stood up and walked out without another word. My mother reached for hers, slowly, hands shaking. I didn't know," she whispered. "I know," I said, and I meant it. Nathan stayed quiet. He didn't apologize, but he didn't leave either. He signed the agreement. I walked out of that office the way I walked in, calm, whole. Not for revenge, not for approval, just for me. When I walked out of that office, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious or smug or even relieved. I felt free. It wasn't some big explosion. There were no dramatic music cues, no slow-motion applause in the background. Just the quiet click of the door closing behind me and this sudden, powerful stillness in my chest. It was over. Not the work, not the company, but the war inside me. The part of me that had spent years chasing their validation, begging silently for a seat at the table, finally stopped running. I had built my own table. Over the weeks that followed, the transition was surprisingly smooth. Nathan kept his head down and did his work. I don't think we ever became close, but there was a kind of mutual respect that began to grow between us, strained, unspoken, but real. My father never came back. He refused the offer, retired quietly and vanished from the company's day-to-day. He hasn't called since. I used to imagine that day differently, him showing up, telling me he was wrong, that he was proud, but that moment never came. And I stopped needing it. My mother, well, she stayed. Not at the company, but in my life. She began texting me, asking questions, sending photos of little things, books she was reading, flowers blooming in the yard, her way of rebuilding something, I guess. One afternoon, we sat on a bench outside my office. She looked older than I remembered, more fragile around the edges. "I should have stood up for you," she said. "I see that now." I didn't say anything right away. I just reached for her hand, because I wasn't angry anymore. I understood her silence now, even if I didn't excuse it. Forgiveness isn't loud. It's not always pretty. Sometimes it just looks like holding someone's hand when you don't have the words. The business is thriving now. Carter and Company is no longer Carter and Company. It's been fully merged into Wild Nest Holdings. We rebranded, modernized, built sustainability into every piece of the operation. What used to be a family name that made me feel small is now part of something bigger, something built with purpose. But here's the thing I never expected. Success didn't heal everything. It didn't erase the years of feeling invisible. It didn't rewrite my childhood. It didn't make every wound disappear. But it gave me something I never had before: perspective. I used to think proving them wrong was the goal, that one day they'd see me on top and regret everything. But I don't want regret. Not anymore. I want peace. I want to look at the mirror and see someone I chose to become, not someone I became just to prove a point. If you've ever felt like the disappointment in the room, if you've ever been the shadow to someone else's spotlight, I want you to hear me when I say this. You are not a failure just because they couldn't see your light. Their vision is not your limitation. Let them underestimate you. Let them doubt you. But don't let them define you. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't yell or fight or break things. It's to grow so quietly, so steadily, that one day they look up and realize the world they once ruled now belongs to you. And when that day comes, you won't need their applause. You'll already be clapping for yourself. So, that's my story. Not a perfect one, not easy, but real. If you're still here, thank you for listening, for feeling it with me, for walking through the hard parts. Maybe something in it reminded you of your own life. Maybe you're in the thick of it right now and trying to be seen, trying to matter, trying to prove to yourself that you're more than what they said you were. And if you are, let me say this: you are not a disappointment. You are not behind. You are becoming. If this story spoke to you, drop a comment. Tell me your truth, or just say, "I see you." Because sometimes that's all we need, like subscribe. Or just come back when the world gets heavy and you need to remember you're not the only one fighting to rise. And remember this: own your story, even the parts they told you to hide.